Okay, it looks like it's working. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. This time it's going to be me moderating the session, and we have Amy O'Donnell here from Nominet, who has kindly agreed to give us a presentation on this new funding initiative, some learnings, and anything else that she wanted to share. Actually, Dawn saw her presentation at FOSDEM and thought that it would be a great idea if we have her here. So yes, I think we can go ahead with the presentation. Amy, just feel free to share. I think I hope you have access to sharing, but let me know if not. Okay, nice, perfect. Um, yeah, I'm gonna give the floor to you, Amy.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and so nice to be invited into your community. So, firstly, just want to say thank you. And yes, Dawn, it was fantastic to meet you at FOSDEM. I was blown away by how busy it was and how much of a maze it was. So it was fantastic to just get to know that community and really embark on this kind of learning journey that we're going through as Nominate. So, very much wearing our learning hats, our humble hats. And so, really open to if you want to stop me to ask questions or you have feedback along the way. I just thought a little presentation might help set the scene a little bit of what we're trying to do. So, yeah, my name's Amy. I'm a social impact lead at Nominet. We are the registry that manages the .uk domain and other top level domains. And we're set up in such a way that our articles of association means we're a company that's limited by guarantee. It means we can't make profit in traditional ways, and our mandate comes from the UK government. So, from that perspective, we are a public benefit company, so any money that we don't reinvest back into our technology stack, we have a lot of work in our social impact team looking at public benefits and what impact we can have in that area. And while traditionally my role has looked at things like digital skills and online safety, Nominet's recently been really trying to reflect and think about how we can align our public benefit mission more closely with our day-to-day work. And that's where we sort of came up with the idea of working more closely on open source domain name system activities. So we set out really with this fund to improve the security, long-term sustainability and resilience of the DNS, focused on open source projects and particularly maintainers. So we weren't looking for new projects or innovations necessarily as we set out, but really those projects that are doing the nuts and bolts of the plumbing of the DNS architecture. So really keen to have a conversation with you all. I hope not to speak too much, but really not only what we have learned in this first year that we've been piloting this project, but we are hoping to scale. We've got approval now for 3 further years of funding. So it really is a window where we can open up that learning and implement changes as we progress. I should also say that when we initially set out to look at this area of work, we were going to partner with the Sovereign Tech Agency, but for one reason or another, that didn't work out. And so it is a project that Nominet have sort of stood up by ourselves, but we really are interested in how we can broker better partnerships, better relationships, and kind of collaborate better in the space as well. So where did we start? I think any good funding starts with doing your research and doing your homework. So we commissioned Demos, who are a digital think tank, a digital consultancy agency, who interviewed lots of different stakeholders to really understand the context of the landscape in the DNS. And we had these questions, which is where should we focus our investment to best support the technology ecosystem, and what funding model should we adopt and why? And it was really interesting because there were lots of dimensions to this, a fantastic mapping, which I can share with you. We did like this Kumu, which is a kind of interactive stakeholder map, and really looked at what it was that we should explore. So there were some questions which were quite insightful to us. And one area that we looked at was that existing digital infrastructure really was a priority for our members and our staff. So that came out something like really strong over developing and innovating on new work or focusing on things that were too exploratory or maybe linked to Nominet's own digital infrastructure. And you can see here also that the open source community was far and away a key community to look at in terms of who's best placed to fix the issues and challenges. Someone said, invest your profit into open source software and development. Seriously, nothing else. And it was quite interesting also that we asked some advisors and some experts and to really understand what our unique role could be in this landscape, because we know that when people who are being paid to do open source are doing it at the behest of a for-profit corporation, the motivations are going to inherently steer them towards those profit-driven motivations. So it's something that I'm always very conscious of, as we are very conscious of as a team, is our own power in a system. So what what role do we play? What, you know, intentionally or not, a funder will always make an impact on a landscape. What are we driving, and how can we unearth those power dynamics so that we can have a really upfront and an honest conversation about the influence and the impact that we have. So the Demos funding really resulted in three key findings about the problems of funding open source infrastructure, which you're welcome to disagree with me or not if you see otherwise. But we saw some trends around funding stemming from corporates and not foundations, which can bias development towards corporate interest. We saw single sources of funding, so one funder, one project, and also funding not necessarily being available for individuals or individual maintainers, only projects and organizations. And by no stretch have we been able to address all of these problems. I'm not purporting that. But we definitely have made some steps towards that. In fact, Dawn, you'll be interested to know that since my presentation at FOSDEM, we were able to put a case to our finance team and have now supported some individual maintainers, not requiring them to register as organizations. So that initially was going to be a big barrier for us, that you had to be a legally registered organization. But we've been able to get around that, albeit there will be some kind of funding caps and some limits to that amount of funding. But something that we're sort of learning as we go along, how we work in sync with finance teams to mitigate some of the risks that they see, and work with those. And then on the second problem, we definitely haven't got around that. We've been in some discussions with different uh, other funding sources and funders of this kind of work, and trying to think about what funders or entities would bring the same kind of values or perspective that Nominet are bringing to the table here. And so that's a kind of TBC. At the moment, it's very much just our funding going on to these particular projects that we're supporting. But I think that diversification and funders pulling together can often make things make for a stronger, more dynamic opportunity. The other thing that we're exploring at the moment is, in our first round, we only were able to announce for 1 year worth of funding. So it's like 6 months worth of activities. And we're now in the process, as we're getting ready to review all of our learning and as we've taken stock, think about whether we can do multi-source funding, so give more certainty over the longer term, potentially up to 3 years worth of funding. So what did we end up doing on the basis of this findings from Demos? I should say that they came up with the idea, or some other ideas about more innovative open source DNS development, things like DNS skills academies, so the future of skills, the pipeline of skills. But we decided to just stick to the cleanest message and the most simple sort of foundations of just working with maintainers of existing open source DNS infrastructure. And while we might explore some of those other areas that came up in the research, we really did want to stick to the knitting of those foundations. So we set out with the Nominet DNS Fund to fund and improve the security of and sustainability of DNS open source. And in the first round, we had £370,000 available GBP. And we said there was no minimum amount. So if you only needed £5,000, that was fine. But up to £100,000 per applicant. And we had 33 applications come forward to us in the end in that window in September, October time. And we wanted to really make sure that the application was as light touch as possible. So we had one of our advisory panel really challenged us that it should be a 20-minute application. So some people said that worked for them. They were able to share links, signpost to existing collateral or content that was online. To evidence their work they were doing, but others said that it did take them longer, and there were things that could be clearer in the application process that would have streamlined that for them. We also recognise that while we do have some DNS expertise within Nominet, we really wanted to make sure that we were listening to the broader community. So our CTO, Ollie, chaired a expert advisory panel, which included two Nominet members. So that's Pete and Michele from Mythic Beasts and Black Knight, respectively. We had Roy from ICANN, Hannah, who conducted the original research from Demos, and then you may already know, because they were at FOSDEM as well, Dawn, Mirko, who was previously Sovereign Tech Agency, and Kaylin, who was previously Linux and now with Probable. And they were fantastic just in the application process, but also in helping us to establish and be transparent in the principles of what we were setting out to fund. And we're really hoping to work with them again as we move forward. We did follow Sovereign Tech Agency's lead in this idea of being really transparent in the principles that we were adopting in the funding. So we set out with these criteria of public benefit, working to the extent to which that the project that was being applied for was enabling a safe, secure, and resilient running of critical infrastructure. We also spoke about core need. So to what extent the operation of the global DNS depends on that solution. We did cover proven use, so the capability of that already being used and at scale. And this was one that when I opened it to the floor in FOSDEM, I think was the most potentially controversial, and people had lots of feedback saying, while it's good to talk about proven use and maintainers, we should also be allowing space for, keeping our eyes open to the next steps for innovation. And it shouldn't necessarily be that something's already operating at scale in order to warrant being successful for funding. So I think that's one that we will definitely be reviewing and looking at. I found the right people quite interesting, because oftentimes it wasn't just, is the person leading the development of this the most skilled, but we were also asking questions about whether they were sustainable. We've had some applications of individuals operating, voluntarily in their own time, and sort of being able to catalyze a conversation about sustainability and whether they need to actually add more contributors to represent the right team in their work. So it's gone beyond this idea of just having the skills and experience, but also looking at that sustainability. And finally, just, an expected question about value and sustainability there. So actually today it's very timely, because I'm very excited that after about a year's worth of work, we have actually announced 5 of the 8 successful applicants from our first window. So this is, if you go to the Nominet website, this is actually an interactive, so you can click on all the different projects and learn about them all. So we ended up funding 8 projects across 6 countries, and these are just 5 of them. So if you imagine them in a DNS query, from left to right from the user browser and back again, we're positioning these as not just the organizations, but the role that the projects play in the funding ecosystem. So you can see it starts with encrypted transport. So we funded the Open SSL library, so a toolkit for general purpose cryptography and secure communications. In performance and testing, we funded Bind9 under Internet Systems Consortium, looking at their testing environment. That one was quite interesting because we did initially articulate that we didn't want to fund hardware, but this was a no-brainer in terms of the hardware needed because it wasn't the load was too high on a cloud testing environment. So that did end up they did end up buying some hardware with our funds. Also Quad9, which it was described as the public bus of supporting resolver implementations and security protections. And then on the right-hand side here, we've got NL Labs Cascade, which is a DNSSEC signer, and OAuth ValidNS, which is about validating large zones in a short time along the pipeline. So there are a number of others, and actually the ones that are missing from here are those smaller organizations or those individuals because they have taken a bit more time for us to support them and set them up. So as I was preparing for today, Adrienne said that it's, a group that's really interested in learning and what we've learnt and looking at different funding models, assessing their value and their impact. So I was hoping that we could also touch on that very briefly. Just to say that Nominet doesn't normally do open calls for applications. In the past, we've always done very intentional invitations to apply where we've done the research and that's enabled us to reach out to the right organizations. So this has been quite new for us to do that open call. It is, there are upsides and downsides. The upside is obviously that it's transparent and it's open to everyone, and you can you don't have to rely on the research to identify the particular organizations you want to work with. But on the other hand, I think it can involve a lot of energy and effort in people going through applications, not knowing whether they're going to be successful or not. And that time is when their time is so invaluable and precious, especially when they're doing this on a voluntary basis or a not-for-profits or who struggle to do this kind of work. In the past, we've been able to compensate for time put into applications because we've had a smaller pool of people putting forward, but we've not been able to do that in this case. And also just the time taken to, shortlist, to organize, to put this through to an application panel. Some of our panelists said it took them a day. Some of them said it took them 2 weeks because they really didn't know as much about the DNS and had to go away and do all their research. And as we go on this journey, we really did treat year one, 2025, as our pilot, and are in the process now of implementing changes based on feedback that we've received. And that's really in three key buckets. So we had the expert advisory panel, and we've now interviewed them and involved them in their feedback in how things went. So a big learning we have is about how the application form translates into the assessment. So it wasn't always clear in the questions we were asking what principles were being assessed. So the advisory panel found that they had to read between the lines somewhat in how they were drawing on the principles to assess the answers as a whole. So we're looking at whether we can be clearer by answer what principles that we're looking for in the assessment, and indeed how that spurts out on the other end as well into a statement of work, because there's then been quite a lot of work post the decision to create that statement of work where the successful applicants have been able to then say exactly what the funding is for, to attach that to their contracts, and we think that we could really streamline that a lot better through the application process. So while we might compromise some of the simplicity that we initially started to introduce by saying you can just throw a link in, you can just say whatever you like, we do think that some of the work up front to give the application process through decision making into statement of work more structure will help us better. And then the advisory panel have basically said that they really think it's gone down very well, and they've played quite a big role in outreach within their own communities, taking this to events, doing that outreach for us to make sure that we're reaching the right people. So they also said it would be good to have a longer window so that there's that time and scope to build in more awareness amongst people that might be applying. The second big bucket that we have in terms of our learning that we've been looking at is the applicants. So both successful and successful. We've been asking their feedback on how it felt to apply, how they heard about the opportunity, what they'd like to see improved in terms of the process, and the wider community as well. So just like going to FOSDEM, we're planning a few other events, so RIPE and OARC, for example, in May. We want to just be part of this community and uh, continue to be transparent and open with our learning. And another area that we're exploring, mostly via Kaelan, who's an with Probable was previously Linux Foundation. He's been connecting us up with the academic community as well, so the likes of the Oxford Internet Institute, so that we could potentially be doing some academic analysis to put some rigor onto the data that we've collected so far. So in our typically in our social impact work, we have a third party monitoring evaluation partner. So they're independent from Nominet. So when any learning is shared or reflected on, they are sort of independent and work separately from us. So you often get a much more open and honest conversation, even in the dynamics of how we are as a funder that we always like to reflect on. So we're still in the process of working that out. In terms of evaluating the success and impact of the projects themselves, we also have we feel this tension between wanting to keep things simple and light touch on people that are doing this work, but also ensuring that we are doing our diligence and we're accountable for the funds that we have and that we have that commitment to learning. So we've also designed, instead of having people fill out lots of log frames and monitoring valuation forms, which I've come myself from the charity sector, and it used to be a real pain, and every donor wanted something different. We are doing it at the moment just on the basis of interviews. So a short 45-minute informal chat at the beginning and at the end to talk about the changes that the funding's enabled, the impact that it's had, and contextualizing that in the geopolitical environment. And then the final one, which I think is really critical, is our internal stakeholders. So we've had to work very closely with communications teams, digital experts, our own DNS experts within Nominet, as well as our kind of procurement, finance, legal teams. So we held a really fascinating wash up. We used lots of virtual post-it notes and a thinking in the weeds of the detail of how we can make our offer uh, clearer, more easy to understand, what other things we're prepared to publish, like publishing that monitoring and evaluation detail, being more offering more clarity in dates. We know that developers don't like coming soon, so avoiding that as much as possible. And just trying to make sure that we're reflecting and implementing changes. And now that we have successful applicants, we also think that is a further tool that we can use to tell that story. So that transparency in how those projects met the criteria, met the principles, and hopefully kind of indicate what would make for a successful application in future rounds. So we're doubling the funds, and it will be launched in towards the end of April, beginning of May. And we're hoping for a bigger application window for activities to start in September 26. And as I say, we've got 3 years worth of funding now. At the moment, we're we're likely to only announce 1 year's worth, but it might be that you can then apply for an extension, and then in a future year we could say you can apply for multiple years. And we will have a track now where previously you had to be an entity to be eligible. We will have a track that individual maintainers under a certain threshold of budget will be able to apply. I feel like I've spoken far too much. You've all got my email. I'll write it as well in the chat. So if you wanted to follow up with me separately, I'm really delighted. But otherwise, I'm really keen on your thoughts, like your reflections. Oh, and already got a question there. We got 33 applications. So actually, I was really pleased. I thought we were going to get about 12 because we're a new kid on the block and I wasn't sure. Uh, whether we would be known and whether we would get outreach into the right list serves. But I think that 33 felt really good, really positive, but also really manageable for the first time that you're trying to run a fund. And we wanted to put every single applicant to our expert advisory panel, so we didn't do any, only very basic eligibility shortlisting. So, projects that were evidently not meeting the criteria were excluded from that, but they all liked seeing every application, and I think 33 was probably pushing the limits of what we were asking of them to review. Alexandros, I can see your hand.
Yes, thank you very much, Amy, for the nice insights and presentation. So really a great initiative. So I had a question about this process you were describing before you basically make the application for open. So you described that at the beginning you did some research and basically pre-selected organizations which you invited for application. So based on which methodologies did you do the research? So was it kind of, I don't know, mining repositories or like, yeah, I'm interested a bit about some more details of this research going on for selecting these right organizations.
Yes, so sorry, I should be really clear that that's what we've traditionally done. So
Mm-hmm.
when we've done funding on digital inclusion or digital skills, working with young people in their digital
Mm-hmm.
lives, we've employed organizations to do both field-based, sort of uh, desk-based research to look at reports and
Mm-hmm.
um, map different stakeholders, but also conduct interviews. So with
Mm-hmm.
government stakeholders, with well-known organizations in that space. And basically, we all often do an analysis of the certain levers of the theory of change that we believe needs to occur, so that then we
Mm-hmm.
can identify the organizations that we want to invite to submit their proposals to us. So a really good example of that is connected to our Countering Online Harm Fund, which is work we've been doing to take all the nasties off the internet. And there's some work we did with Public. I can share a link with you, and it kind of maps the moves that we really anticipated around the need for cross-sector collaboration, the need for academic organisations to work with civil society groups, and the need to think systemically rather than preventatively on
Mm-hmm.
some of this work. Juxtapose that, however, with this Nominate DNS fund, which is the first time we've done an open call. So we did do conduct this research with Demos to help us say what level should this be launched, what are our options, position with our board to say, should this be about human rights and positioning this as a very much connected to values? Should this be about DNS skills and the pipeline of who's coming to this space? Or should we just launch a fund that's about the very basic maintainers of this work? And we centered on that final one.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and in the end was an open call. I can actually show you the uh, I hid it from my presentation, but I can show you. This is how we would sort of went about it. So it's got like can send this link to you. So it's a mapping that we did of all the different organizations, multi-stakeholder organizations, tech companies, funders, and then selected a sample of those to interview to best understand the system. And it basically found lack of diverse funding and profit-driven companies providing funding.
Cool. Very interesting.
Yes, thank you so much, Amy, and sorry, Don and Paul. Um, but my question was around we you talked about the being lightweight in terms of monitoring these projects or having some idea of okay, what's the effect of the funding and being accountable for the funds. And so I think your current approach is to have a 25-minute interview before and after the funding. And I was wondering what are the main questions that you would be asking there, or if there's even a set list of questions, or it's more about their experience of the funding. And then maybe the one before the funding happened is maybe just them explaining the project and the different questions that you're asking in the assessment part. So I was just wondering if you have a set of questions there that you'd like to ask from these projects.
I thought you would ask this. So this is the questions. Oh, it's a 45-minute interview. Can you read this okay? Should I zoom in?
Just a little bit, maybe. Thank you.
A collaborative conversation, not an audit, to understand the current state from the perspective of the people involved. And then at the end, we plan for a second interview to explore your experience so we can improve. So it starts on the individual level. Personally, how would you describe your role, the workload of your project you contribute to? What does your day-to-day week look like? What's the one thing you're hoping this funding will change for you? How would you describe your current work-life balance and those of your current maintainers? Then a section dedicated to the contribution of the project. So it's about the core objectives, ambition. What would you describe as the current life stage of the projects you're focused on? Are they in early growth or mature maintenance focus phase? 2 to 3 most important things you hope to achieve, which is like our kind of theory of change or definition of success. Moving on to the kind of technical challenges and the projects that you're working on, what are your priorities for improvement, describing the state of your documentation, and is there something that would look like a win for you? We've got sections on social and community health. Is the workload manageable? What are the goals for you in the community with this funding? Economic and operational state. Are you relying on volunteer efforts, donations, other sponsorships? What are the operational costs that you have? And are there any risks that you see integrating this funding in? And then stepping out a bit further to look at the ecosystem, how it fits within your wider DNS open source ecosystem, your dependents, your collaborators, and any partnerships that you hope the funding might help you build or strengthen. And then we're talking about some metrics. Now, we all know that funding numbers of things, counting numbers of things only gives a very small part of a story. But we think it is important to, think about, are there things we can measure around active users, maintainers, active contributors? So the aim is to do this now and then repeat once the projects are completed and analyze for change.
Nice. Thank you so much, Amy. Paul, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much for the really interesting presentation, Amy. Full disclosure, I work at the Sovereign Tech Agency, so I know Mako and obviously know Killian as well, and can remember some of the back and forth trying to set up the partnership. But really happy to see the fund off the ground, and also really sort of to see like how you're approaching questions of impact, because obviously I think there's areas of shared interest there. I had two kind of questions that were related to this. One of the things that we found, particularly with the Sovereign Tech Fund, as a public benefit company, if you like, is that we operate to calendar year budget planning. And sometimes that budget planning doesn't necessarily align particularly well with the sort of realities of open source communities that are very dynamic and sometimes need to, adjust their project management or their work packages in light of what's happening within their communities. Whereas, as a kind of bureaucratic entity, we have certain reporting requirements. I wondered if you'd had any sort of instances where there's a tension between the funder and fundee relationship in your work so far, because of the kind of respective nature of the two, I guess. And then relatedly, I find it really interesting that you're doing these kind of lightweight interviews before and after. And I wondered, just was that was a consideration from the beginning, right? To sort of put the interviews at the beginning and end of the process, right? And who does it? Is it a technologist or is it someone from your kind of social impact team?
Thanks so much, Paul. Just writing that down. Okay. So yeah, very good question on the first. I find this to be a real sticking point for the financial year that we are attached to in terms of getting money out of the door, if that makes sense. So our financial year runs from the end of March for 1 year, and often our activities start to kick off in April. And then you have quite a lot of work in terms of, all right, when should we schedule the window for applications? When should we get these things signed off? And we're always a little bit over ambitious in thinking, oh, that'll, signing a contract that should take a few weeks. No, sometimes and we have to allow for more time. But what we then have is, because we've budgeted for that fund in that financial year, the activities or the signature of that contract has to happen within that financial year. It's a case of use or lose it. So we do struggle with that, and I think we do have a lot of pressure then on the applicants, the successful applicants, to shoehorn some of their activities into our funding structure, just to make sure it gets done. But I think that there are ways around it. So something we have done with our Countering Online Harm Fund, for example, is to get sign off for 3 years worth of funding. So you're not doing this kind of, not only are you then offering more sustainable funds, but you can look more into the future and allocate that budget according to when that fund is needed across those financial years. And something that then gives more certainty and less of this kind of squeeze to quickly get something through and signed off. I think the other thing is, I was going to say was, it just our learning for next year is working backwards from when there's going to be sufficient time for delivery of projects within a certain financial year as well. So that should be on us to put our emphasis on bringing that application window forward so that the activities can fit within the financial year rather than not. So there are just some things that we can't avoid. But the other thing to say is, we can get round it too. It's not like it goes into the abyss. Like, sometimes we're underspent, and it just means that the next year we have to make a case for our board to up the funding. It's still in the bank account, it's still there. And we also have had, in our social impact work, some strategies. Like, we've been working with a really cool organization, which is called the Charity Aid Foundation, and you can basically put a financial donation, so it has to be to a charity, so it couldn't be just to an open source organization. It was some of the organizations we've funded are charities, but as long as you're under UK law funding a charity, you can almost, like a little squirrel that there, and that way you can transfer that into a future financial year as well. So there's ways that we can manage our finances to do better and more effective planning. But I think overall, Paul, I would just say I really relate to that sense of funders being under financial year restrictions based on our financial audits and how things run. How we mitigate the impact of the pressure of that going then on to our applicants. And I think it's something that we need to learn more about and lean more into, because it is often a case of, okay, quick, get the money out the door. So I can really relate to that. Your second question was about the lightweight interviews. So yeah, definitely was something we worked very closely with Kaylin on, because of his passion for academic communities and measurement, and set that out from the beginning. And at the moment, it's going to be with our social impact team. So I'm obviously very conscious of those power dynamics that we want to have a cut through and have an honest conversation. And it might be that for future years, we do look at an independent evaluator, such as in Focus for that work with us currently on our social impact program. So they manage all of our kind of independent evaluations. And again, the involvement of the academic community. So Oxford Internet Institute, for example, we would love to explore some conversations about how we apply more rigor to that. But at the moment, it wouldn't be a technology person because turns out DNS skills are very, very sought after, and the experts that we have borrowed their time in terms of helping us set this up and evaluate and then define statements of work has been really, really precious. So we also just need to be conscious of that. So it will be our social impact team. But I welcome your feedback on ways that you've done that as part of the Sovereign Tech Fund, and if there are things that you think work better than others.
Yeah, happily. I mean, I think others in the call will know one of the things we're trying to work on at STA, and more particularly measuring the STF program, is a balance of qualitative and quantitative approaches, because we can take advantage of the fact that so much data is just out there by virtue of it being open source. And there's already, a really well-established kind of conceptualization and theorizing around like metrics in open source development, particularly thinking here of CHAOSS, obviously. And we can apply them in different project contexts as measures of like outcome measurements, really. And that means that we don't have to necessarily kind of burden projects with like extra reporting or anything like that. We can just, kind of run these analyses. But what's crucial there is actually having an understanding for the context and what the goal of the project was, and allowing for, if you like, the heterogeneity and the complexity of a given project. So there will be other funding sources. So what we're trying to do is complement that quantitative approach then with the actual project reports themselves, and then testimonials from maintainers in interviews. And like I think the big problem that we face, particularly because we've got like multiple programs and lots of different types of work that's being contracted and lots of different types of projects, is that there isn't obviously a kind of like universal measurement or indicator for our impact. So we have to contextualize it and build to it. We can do kind of counterfactual things with synthetic data, but that will always be blind to context to some degree.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, my specialism and previous work in this area has been very social science, so I'm used to hard to measure things. But I'm really open to ideas of like, are there standards and alignments in things that we can be measuring on in terms of the health of the ecosystem and the impact of funding, and not least that it paints a picture that helps secure this funding for future, and ensures that we're constantly involved in that learning loop and improving as we go. So I'm really keen to learn more as I learn more about this space. So really hope to keep the channels open.
Yeah, definitely. Love to have a chat sometime. That'd be great.
Nice. And Amy, you're welcome to any of our working group meetings. We have one every 2 weeks. Actually, I think the next time it will be either Paul, you presenting, right, on some of the SDA work, or Abby Press coming in and presenting if they're available. Anyone else has any other questions? Or Amy, if you have any questions to us, we will be kind of finishing close to 10 minutes before the hour, but just let us know.
I would love to. Thank you for the invite. I think very much wearing the learning hat. So whatever we can do to align. I think I suppose my question really has just been about outreach to make sure that we are not only inviting, building awareness, because we're not used to doing open calls, how we make sure that this is really transparently open and also um, meets the needs, is tailored to the kind of diverse needs of people and making for a really inclusive and accessible application process. And also, I think what I've been really learned from Mirko in particular, who was previously with Sovereign Tech Agency, was the importance of transparency in decision making, so that it's really evident. We've just announced today, and we're trying to do a lot of things with a lot of messaging around who we funded, why is the DNS important, why is open source important, what does that mean for some of our government stakeholders, but also in like, this is why this project's been selected over another, and being really transparent in that. So these are just like open discussion questions that I'm really interested in, particularly as we sort of transition into getting ready to launch a second round. And we're not calling it a round, we're calling it an application window, because there's a whole thing called rounds with ICANN going for TLDs and bidding for that. So we're not calling it rounds, it's calling it an application window.
Yeah, nice. It's great to see funders being this committed, I think, to some of these principles that they have set out, as well as being transparent about them. And it's great to hear. I wish all of the funders would do that. But yes, on the agenda, the only thing I have is a reminder for all things of open. There's a call for proposals deadline, which is the 31st of March. But I don't think we have any other reminders, but let me know if there are. Okay. If not, then thank you so much, Amy, for being here. Hope to see you in some of our next sessions. I think
Thank you
everyone
for having
enjoyed
me.
the presentation. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thanks for
so
having
much.
me. Talk
Bye
soon.
bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye bye.
Bye.